Dr. Wami, I think we should just go ahead.
Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, from wherever part of the world you are joining us. And let me first start by apologizing profusely for any noise you may be hearing. We are in the month of Ramadan, so um, seems like there are mosques around the area that are engaging in their religious activities. So hopefully the noise isn't too bad, but I'd just like to start by apologizing up front for any possible noises you may be hearing in my background. We greatly appreciate everyone taking out their time to be with us from their busy schedules for this webinar, which is intended to celebrate World Intellectual Property Day. And World Intellectual Property Day is an annual event established to celebrate the significance of intellectual property systems and their importance for societal welfare. And this year's event focuses on innovation and creativity, especially as it is driven by the youth all around the world. And that is why we have our theme for today, which is IP and youth innovation for a better future. Um, Along with the celebration of World IP Day, uh, we have the Department of Mercantile and Private Law, in conjunction with the South Africa Research Chair on IP Innovation and Development at the Faculty of Law, University of Cape Town. And both institutions are having this collaborative event to mark the day and to have this webinar that you have all graciously attended. We will be focused on collective management organization in the empowerment of Africa's creative youths. The event also gives us the opportunity to celebrate a very important book on collective management in Africa, and that has been written by one of our very own. When I say one of our very own, um, he's now at the University of Venda, but he's an alumni of UCT, my brother and my colleague, Dr. Desmond, who is arguably one of the fastest rising stars in intellectual property, both on the continent and globally. And it is a pleasure and a honor to be able to celebrate his book on a day like this. Um, the seminal contribution of this book has been made possible with funding from the SAST chair, that is from the Faculty of Law, as well as with moral support from the University of the Venda, who has also graciously allowed us to have this webinar. Um, with regards to the management of this webinar, myself and Dr. Desmond will be moderating the webinar. I will be taking the initial parts, and I'll be introducing our dignitaries today that have so graciously made this event possible. First of all, I'd like to recognize the presence of Professor Bawa Kanyani, who is the Dean of the Faculty of Management, Commerce and Law of the University of Venda, as well as Professor Linus Ndlovu, Director of the School of Law, UNIVEN, Professor Anthony Nwafo, Head of Department of Mercantile and Private Law, who is being represented by the acting Head of Department, Advocate Gideon Hubert, as well as Professor Caroline Ube, the UCT Chair on IP Innovation and Development. Thank you. Introductory remarks from Professor Kanyani, and then we'll be having brief remarks from Professor Ube, and then the concept notes from Professor Ndlovu. After these introductory remarks, I will hand over to my co-moderator, Dr. Desmond, who will introduce our esteemed speakers and moderate the rest of the day's proceedings. And thank you all once again for gracing us with your presence. And we urge everyone to please remember to have your devices muted when you are not speaking, and to use the chat section for any questions or queries you may have, and they will be addressed during the question and answer session. Thank you very much. Also, please note that this webinar is being recorded for posterity's purpose. Thank you very much once again. I would like to hand over to Professor Kanyani to please give us his brief opening remarks. Thank you very much, Prof.
Thank you very much, Chair, for the very warm welcome. And you made my role very easy, but I want to start by saying that the event comes at a time when the University of Venda is celebrating its 40th anniversary this year in 2022. Over the years, or the 4 decades of its existence, the university has produced outputs and many graduates who are holding positions of responsibility and much influence in politics, in the corporate and the society. The celebration of the university for the 4 decades is characterized by the grand achievements, recognizing the current success stories. And this webinar is not an exclusion, that also contributed in shaping the future discourse. I also want to point that the University of Venda has, at the beginning of 2021, started implementing its new strategy, the 2021 to 2025, which aims to position the university for impact, both locally and internationally. And its 4 pillars reside or domicile on student-centeredness and engaged scholarship, which we're going to be talking in this seminar today. And the other pillar is on entrepreneurial university, and the 3rd pillar being governance for outstanding scholarship, and the 4th one being linkages, partnership, and internationalizations. These are the 4 grand pillars of the university that resonate with what we're going to talk today. Recognizing the 2022 World Intellectual Property Day, this webinar, it is so much important and relevant. The topic, empowering youth in Africa's creative industry, the role of collective management organization, is not only relevant, but is also topical to grapple with crucial issues and through the engaged scholarship lens of this university. Africa is known for its exploits and exploitations of resources. And one among those in this space of intellectual property is the area of music, the area of filming, the area of printing and publishing. They are the soft targets that this legal infrastructure on intellectual property and competition should stop these imperial and colonial tendencies that keep on rising their heads. Therefore, it is very important that there's a need for transparent and fair process for the ownership and the distribution of royalties to creators of this knowledge in the continent. But more importantly, also the access to these innovations and the creations that should not be exploited. So intellectual property issues, they are perennial in nature, and this seminar should not beat about the bush, but hold the bull by its horn and openly and frankly engage in these talks more robustly and radically. So I want to thank the School of Law, especially the Department of Mercantile and Private Law, and more particularly Dr. Desmond Oriakopa, through his book, Regulatory Perspective from Nigeria, for reopening and stimulating this debate unapologetically by recognizing the 2022 World Intellectual Property Day. So I want to recognize the participation of Sarki Chair on Intellectual Property, Innovation and Development at UCT. I also want to recognize the World Intellectual Property Organization, WIPO, in Geneva, and also the participating universities, University of Venda, University of Pretoria, University of South Africa, as well as University of Cape Town. And including our intellectual property law experts who are appearing on this program will be talking to us just to kick in the open engagement for this webinar. And as a collective effort, we want to take these legal issues forward for discussion this afternoon. With these words, I wish you all the best to grapple with these matters and a happy landing. Over to you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Thank you very much. I'd like to hand over to Professor Caroline to please give us her brief remarks.
Thank you, Dr. Wami. Good afternoon, good evening, good day to everyone. Thank you for availing yourselves. This is a really joyous occasion, I think, for me particularly. It is both a joy and an honor to be here to celebrate Dr. Desmond's book and to also mark World IP Day, which is tomorrow. We have a really robust and rich program for this afternoon, and I will leave it to our esteemed speakers to speak about the technicalities and intellectual property, as it were. What I wanted to speak about really is the role of intellectual property, the role of youth in development initiatives and priorities on the continent. And so I think that today brings a really good confluence of all of these things. First of all, to watch a brilliant young scholar like Dr. Desmond Oriakopa presenting his work and leading in the field, and then also to watch that work being relevant to the lives and livelihoods of youth across the continent. And we know that ours is a really rich continent. It's a continent that is rich in many kinds of knowledge, many kinds of creativity, but because of the theme of today's event, I think we're focusing perhaps on the creative arts, and that is another very rich dividend that we have on the continent. So for me, this conversation today brings together so many interesting and important aspects of our lives. And of course, the last thing I want to speak about is what Professor Kanyanya has just been speaking about, governance. So once we have this wealth of creativity, of talent, and all of the profits and the joy that come with it, The next thing that comes to mind is how we're to govern that appropriately on the continent and indeed globally, so that it aids to socioeconomic development, so that it supports us in all of our endeavors. And so those are really the three main things that come to mind when I think about this. And again, the last word I want to finish off with is joyous. It is indeed a joy, an honor, and a privilege to be here with all of you. Thank you for joining us, and back to our very able facilitators and moderators.
Thank you very much. I love the fact that everybody is keeping to time, keeping it short and sweet. In that spirit, I'd like to hand over to Professor Ndlovu to please give us the concept note for today. Thank you very much, Prof.
Thank you, Chair and Co-Chair. I'm going to disappoint you. I'm not going to keep it short and sweet, unfortunately. But that is fine. I would want to specifically acknowledge the two co-chairs here, and my executive dean, Professor Kanyane, and our guest speaker, of course, the WIPO Assistant Director General for Global Challenges and Partnership, Dr. Edward Kwakwa. Our other esteemed speakers, Dr. Marisella Ouma, Dr. Okorie, Dr. Joel Baloyi. I'm not sure whether I've seen him in here, but I hope he is joining. And then I would also want to extend a special word of welcome to our SAST chair, the UCT SAST chair, Professor Caroline Ngube. And being in the academy, you see, people like speaking in abbreviations. So there could be some colleagues here who don't know what SAST stands for. So colleagues, that's South African Research Chairs Initiative. And some of this information one has to give away at appropriate moments. Colleagues, this year's theme is, this year's World Intellectual Property Day theme is IP and youth, and then innovation for a better future. And then for us as UNIVEN, we've chosen to look at IP and the African youth, considering the potential and the actual role played by collective management organizations, obviously inspired by a book written by one of our own, Dr. Orio Kogba, in the Department of Mercantile and Private Law. So in essence, consider this event as a double celebration. We are celebrating World IP Day in advance, and then at the same time, it's some kind of a book launch for Dr. Orio Kogba's book, because it was published. I recall us talking about it in the school, but then this could also achieve some level of publicity for the book. And of course, we are aware the book was published with the generous financial support from the UCT's SAST chair, and we are grateful for that. And then, of course,
I only mentioned the strategic plan because one of its core concepts, it introduces the organization's vision in respect of intellectual property as being a world striving for a world where innovation and creativity from anywhere, not just innovation and creativity from the developed countries, but innovation and creativity from anywhere is supported by intellectual property for the good of everyone. So this is a vision that resonates very well with our continent, I believe. And that's the sense in which I am glad you have kindly invited me to join in commemorating World Intellectual Property today. Now, I must say I am not very familiar with Microsoft Teams, but let me see if I can open and share my document with you. So as was mentioned, my overall topic is intellectual property and youth, unlocking Africa's demographic dividend. So what do I have to say about intellectual property and youth, unlocking Africa's demographic dividend? What I simply intend to do, and I know it's a strict 15 minutes, And since everyone has kept to the time, I will definitely keep to the time too. I'm going to discuss, first of all, what are collective management organizations? Why are they relevant today? And I'm comforted in the fact that the subsequent presenters are all going into much greater detail than I need to go to. So I will quickly skim over these topics. I will look at the players we are discussing when we talk about unlocking Africa's demographic dividend. What is the environment within which we are operating? And within that environment, what are the challenges for leveraging the copyright system? I will attempt to proffer some advice to African creators on how to unlock their full potential in the creative industries. Quickly look at certain WIPO provisions for creators and collective management organizations, and then end with some conclusions. So, starting with part one, why are collective management organizations relevant today? And it's simply the fact that collective management organizations must grapple with the challenges of the digital world. We all know at the time when we started with the Berne Convention over 100 years ago, we had not entered into the era of the digital world. And so clearly when it comes to digital now, the big challenge is the processing of big data. In that sense, collective management organizations, especially at the international level, they've made large investments and they've developed specific in-house tools that are able to efficiently track and, more importantly, capture the trillions of streams of downloads that are generated by music and the audiovisual consumption. This is all a reality of the digital world, and we as a continent must also grapple with that digital world. And that's the important sense in which collective management societies are a relevant model in this day and age. Due to the expertise they've developed, publishers and creators now are increasingly joining these collective management organizations. Now, which players are we talking about? How do we need to understand the players? We are talking about Africa's youth clearly. And as has already been mentioned, our continent happens to be the continent with the greatest potential in terms of numbers. So clearly, when we say some 65% of the continent's population constitute youth, and of course in WIPO, when we refer to youth, we are talking about the under 35s. People ranging from age 15 to 35 constitute the youth. So in terms of the players, we are referring to the creators, those who create the music, those who create the copyrighted materials. We are referring to the collective management organizations. And last, but definitely not the least, we are referring to the users of the creative work, the users of the work that has been created. This is the trio that constitute the players in the discussion. I've already referred to the statistics concerning the fact that the youth in Africa make up 65% of the population. Clearly, this is a youth that must be looked at, that must be nurtured, and most importantly, taken into account in all discussions. Specifically, in any event, the youth are in fact dominating creative industries, and they are reaching the outside world. And here, when I say the outside world, it's not just the continent of Africa, they are reaching the whole world. And these are a few examples I have given here. you are more familiar with some of these examples. So when we talk about Afro beats, for example, we have Wizkid, we have Burna Boy, we have CK, we have Diamond Platinums. These are all Nigerian, as you know, but we also have in South Africa your own Mafikizolo. These are just world-class examples of the youth we are talking about who are engaged in the creative industries and who have a lot to offer the whole world. A second example, and this may be a bit more peculiar, a bit more relevant to South Africa, Amapiano dance moves. Amapiano, we all know, is a genre that originated in South Africa as far back as 2012. And today, the Amapiano dance moves have taken over social media feeds across the world, as epitomized, for example, with the Umlando dance challenge. And speaking of Amapiano dancers, we have Uncle Waffles, God bless her little creativity. We have Kamompela, and there are lots of others in terms of Amapiano dancing. Quick third example, African film and television. And here we all know, incidentally, these examples I am given are all in the strict context of the creative industries. But as you can imagine, we have several other examples that would fall outside the creative industries, but that's not the subject of our discussion today. Today, we are talking about empowering youths in Africa's creative industry, the role of collective management organizations. And that is why I'm giving examples specifically from the creative industry. So in terms of the rise in online streaming platforms, examples I've given here, Ghana Jollof. For those of you who don't know, I happen to be from Ghana. And as you may know, there is a very, very healthy rivalry between Ghana on the one hand and Nigeria on the other hand when it comes to jollof, to the extent that Nigeria says, we are the ones who produce jollof, and the Ghanaians to say, hell no, it's Ghanaians who produce jollof. It's a very healthy rivalry, and this is epitomized in Ghana Jollof, which shows on Showmax. I am sure you are all familiar with it. Another example is The River, currently showing on Mzansi Magic. We also have The Young, Famous and African, and this is more Netflix. Netflix, as you know, is not just on the continent, it's worldwide. Finally, the example I've given here is Jennifer's Diary, which is on Scene 1 TV. The point being, African film and television is also making its mark and it's extending to the outside world, very importantly. So when we talk about the environment in which we are discussing collective management organizations, there is the concept of urban density. We all know everyone wants to move to the cities. They want to leave the urban, the villages and go to the cities, the urban areas. We have what we call the youth bulge, in the sense in which we say 65% of the continent's population is comprised of the youth. It also turns out the majority of the population finds itself going to specific areas. So the reference to a youth bulge is just having youth overcrowded in specific areas. Finally, in terms of the environment, we have what we all know as the new digital era, which is more or less dictating how we pace things, how we determine things. Now, speaking of the digital era, of course, we now have platforms such as TikTok. In the past, copyright owners or performers would have to go to music labels. Now, all you do is you do something, you go to TikTok, you put it on the system and it goes viral. Everyone gets to see it worldwide. An example I've given here is the song Love Nwantiti by CK. It was created 2 years before it even began to trend globally following a TikTok dance challenge. It had to be a TikTok dance challenge that gave real notoriety to Love Nwantiti. Again, artists are clearly increasingly releasing their music through online distributors like TuneCore. And rather than being signed on to big record labels, they realize this is something that we can do business with without going to the big labels. So that's a concept that the digitalization has naturally brought with us. Now, speaking of digitalization, let's take a step back, and not necessarily in the context of digital, but simply referring to SIM cards, which are still used on an essential basis. And as I've stated here, there are over 800 million mobile SIM cards on the continent, and this number is growing on a daily basis, notwithstanding what is happening with digitalization. And in that sense, perhaps, and this is a question that may come up when other panelists present, it's possible Africa's dividend lies in mobile rather than digital. But that's a question that's still out for the jury to determine. So with the concept of urban development, and I see time is running out very quickly, so I'm going to be even faster now. Creative industry entrepreneurship clearly plays a vital role in the urban development of cities. And this creates pathways. It creates pathways for employment, which is important, especially when we are talking about the youth. And when we are talking about the youth, particularly on the day preceding World Intellectual Property Day, at a time when World Intellectual Property Day has been devoted to a theme expressly concerning the youth. So what are the challenges for leveraging copyright on our continent? One, I refer to the lack of public awareness. This is very well known. The lack of respect for intellectual property. Again, very well known. We have new up and coming artists often being taken undue advantage of by distributors, by ownership agreements that are just not made from the time an artistic work is made. And clearly, for as long as these artists are not woke, they are going to be taken advantage of. And that is why it is important for collective management organizations in Africa to be empowered so they can continue to identify who to distribute royalties to, for example. In so long as an African creator has not accounted for the metadata on composers or on writers, it's going to be difficult for collective management organizations to be able to say, this is where we pay the money to. And that's the sense in which we need to nurture a business sense in the creators. Creativity must, of necessity, come with a fundamental knowledge of business and what goes with it. So in WIPO, what we've done is we've tried to give support to the youth in the creative industries. And these are quick examples. We have the WIPO Copyright Treaty. It was adopted as far back as 1996, entered into force 2002. And what it does is it provides additional protections for copyright that is deemed necessary as a result of the advent of the technology age. Before that copyright treaty, of course, was the well-known Berne Convention, which did not account for current technology. We also have in WIPO our copyright and creative industry sector. This is one of the 8 sectors in the organization, in the sense in which my sector is the global challenges and partnerships sector. We have a whole sector devoted exclusively to copyright and creative industries. And that sector offers technical assistance, capacity building, and support for collective management of copyright. There's also a standing committee on copyright and related rights. And for those who follow that committee, you will know it's a forum for stakeholders to discuss the role and future of copyright. Final example I've given here is what we call WIPO for Creators, another recent issue that we've created in WIPO. And WIPO for Creators simply supports authors, and it helps in enhancing their knowledge and the copyright aspects of their work. So, advice to young African creators, advice that you've probably been given, but that I definitely I'm obliged to again repeat, especially on the eve of World Intellectual Property Day, devoted to the youth. As a creator, please remember it is no longer enough to just be talented as you all are, but we can't just be producing phenomenal works these days. We need to also be business-minded, because it's the business sense that transposes our creativity, our phenomenal works into tangible outcomes. We have to understand copyright management as a part of our creativity. What should young creators do today to unlock their potential? First of all, I would suggest definitely register with the collective management organizations, and you will be hearing more about collective management organizations from the other presenters. Secondly, I would say attribute your works accurately. The copyright system depends on specificity to be able to tell accurately what can be attributed to who. Thirdly, I would suggest we cannot escape from digital. So let's all make sure we are with the program. As the lingo says, let's be woke when it comes to the digital space. The future, if I can repeat, the former First Lady of the United States, belongs to those who believe in the beauty of their dreams. And I'm not necessarily suggesting here that Madam Eleanor Roosevelt, the wife of Franklin, was an African, but she very well may have been, and we didn't know. So let me end with this quote from her. And in thanking you, let me kindly remind you all that tomorrow we are celebrating World Intellectual Property Day. And again, the theme is intellectual property and the youth, looking to a better future. So on this note, let me again thank the University of Venda. Let me thank Professor Desmond Oriakugba, and let me thank everyone else. And I wish us all a very happy and productive World Intellectual Property Day tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kwakwa. As usual, it's always a delight to listen to you, and I wish we have enough time so that you continue talking. The delight in listening to you is not just from your very sonorous voice, but from your masterful way of delivering, your delivering knowledge, and the depth also of your knowledge. The way you took us, from a broad perspective of what African youthfulness and how it is manifested in the creative sector. And it's an important issue you raised, the important challenge that collective management organizations face, which is distribution of royalties, stemming from their difficulty to identify rights owners. In fact, these are some of the issues that are discussed in my book, and these issues will be further trashed out by the lineup of speakers. And without wasting time, I'll be inviting Dr. Chijioke Okorie from the University of Victoria, and she will be presenting on the role of African collective management organizations in empowering youths for a better future. But please, before she comes on board, let me note that Dr. Kwakwa may be leaving us soon, as he has another event, to attend today in 10 minutes time, I guess. So Dr. Okorie, please.
Thank you.
Okay, hello everyone. Dr. Kwakwa has given us a hint regarding his favorite musicians and films. Hello everyone again. Thank you again, Dr. Oriakugba and University of Venda. And,
okay, I've turned the camera off.
And my SY colleagues, still family at University of Cape Town, the South African research chair in IP, Innovation and Development, Professor Ube, and Dr. Kolawole as well. Thank you also to University of Venda for the opportunity to speak today. And like Dr. Rakoba said, my presentation is on the role of African CMOs, collective management organizations, in empowering youth for a better future. I'm not going to be presenting with slides, but I'm happy to share a transcript of my presentation with Dr. Rakoba and the organizers after this webinar. Okay, so in speaking about the role that African CMOs can, or the role that they should play in empowering youth for a better future, I'm taking my premise from Dr. Rakaba's definition or description of the core functions of CMOs in his book that we're celebrating today, Copyrights, Collective Management Organizations, and Competition in Africa. And I'm taking that premise because it serves my purposes, and also because it accords with the views of other scholars that have written on the subject of copyright collective management organizations, both globally and in Africa, including my humble self. And the core functions of collective management organizations are to obtain the license of authors and copyright owners, negotiate with and grant licenses to prospective users of copyright protected works, monitor the use of such works, receive royalties for their use, and distribute the royalties to authors and copyright owners. And of course, the arrangement between CMOs on the one hand and copyright owners is possible because of the assignment or license that CMOs receive from copyright owners in respect of the exclusive rights that such owners have under relevant copyright statutes. And my argument is that if CMOs were to exercise their functions effectively and efficiently, they can be in a position to empower youth for a better future. And as the World Intellectual Property Organization rightly points out in its press release for this year's World IP Day, youths are engaged in creative and inventive endeavors, and they are the ones through that they change and continue to change our world for the better. And like Dr. Kwakwa pointed out, intellectual property systems, including copyright, makes it possible for them to reap the benefits of their efforts and to also incentivize further creativity and innovation. And so it then goes without saying that organizations such as collective management organizations who administer copyright on behalf of these copyright owners, these artists, these authors, these creators, that is the youth. Those organizations like collective management organization can make or mar the systems that support and reward creativity. And there are two avenues to consider in exploring the role of African CMOs through the prism of their core functions. And the first one relates to the regulatory framework and collective management organizations' adherence to regulatory requirements. And so that's the first one. And the second one relates to the collective management organizations' internal initiatives to empower youth for a better future. Dr. Rakaba's book focuses mainly on the regulatory framework, in particular copyright and competition laws. And in this regard, there are various provisions within both copyright and competition laws that seek to regulate the affairs of collective management organizations in their discharge of these core functions that I've mentioned. And the key one here is the requirement for, in most jurisdictions, the requirement for an operating license for collective management organizations. So essentially, in order to operate as a collective management organizations would require the license of the copyright sector regulator, and usually such licenses are issued for a specified period, and they may be renewed post-expiration. So both the initial license application and the renewal application themselves require the CMOs to comply with various requirements, such as the consent of a large number of copyright owners and authors, for them to present their distribution plans or their distribution rules or policies, for them to submit annual distribution statements and things like that. And these requirements help to ensure accountability and transparency on the part of the CMOs. And more significantly, these requirements take cognizance of the position that CMOs occupy vis-a-vis the copyright ecosystem. So they are dealing with copyright owners on the one hand and copyright users on the other hand. So they stand as sort of like intermediary in the copyright ecosystem, because they are dealing with both sides on both sides of the divide. And So that's that for looking at their role from a regulatory framework standpoint. To look at the role of that CMOs can play from the perspective of their internal activities in discharging their functions, I would also, zero in more on the functions of CMOs, which I've already pointed out, and to highlight how these functions can serve as avenues for CMOs to play a significant role rather in empowering youth for a better future. So the first one, obtaining the license of copyright owners and authors. And as I've said earlier, this is the only or the sole kickoff point for CMOs to validly administer copyright on behalf of copyright owners and authors in Africa. Copyright law, of course, grants a bundle of exclusive rights to authors to do certain things in relation to their creative work. So CMOs need the consent or permission or license of copyright owners to exercise those rights on their behalf. And one of the key questions here is whether copyright owners and authors, essentially the youth, still need CMOs in the light of the internet and emerging technologies that allow them to self-distribute and manage their works. And I think that the answer is yes, for many reasons, but chief among them is that CMOs, they have the infrastructure, they have the network to undertake global management and administration of creative works, and only a few authors or a few copyright owners can manage that on a global scale. So, and most of these few are unfortunately not on the African continent. Dr. Kwakwa also ably addressed this in his keynote address. But moreover, and this is something that is properly explored in Dr. Oriakoba's book, CMOs have the market power and the consequent bargaining power to negotiate better returns for copyright owners from users. And a good example on the African continent is the multi-territorial digital music licensing hub, comprising of several CMOs from various African countries and managed by Capasso, which is used to license African music on digital platforms. Dr. Rakoba and I explored this multi-territorial digital music licensing hub in the light of the prospective currently negotiated IP protocol of the AFTA agreement. And the link to access our article is in Dr. Rakoba's book, and it will also, I'll also put that up on the chat box after my presentation. But suffice it to say that African CMOs can do more and better to get things right in the digital landscape of copyright management. And one illustration that I can, that serves for now is the challenges with the way that Kenya's Copyright Board handled the digital public performance of copyright protected works by DJs and other persons in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. So instead of the digital platforms themselves being required to liaise with collective management organizations, the Kenya's Copyright Board clarified that DJs who wish to stream sound recordings on digital platforms are subject to the terms and conditions of the platform they wish to use for streaming. And Kekobo then also said, Kekobo is the short form of Kenya's Copyright Board. They further said that such streaming is outside the purview of its authority, and it's also outside the purview of the authority of CMOs. I will also share the link to a commentary that I wrote on that matter. But the key thing here is that in dealing with digital platforms, CMOs also have a very significant role to play, and both the regulatory framework and the CMOs themselves need to address those roles and grapple with it sufficiently. And similar comments apply to the function relating to negotiating and granting licenses to copyright users. And the only addition that I will make here relates to the significant bargaining power that CMOs have and which it can use for the benefit of copyright owners. And I would also refer, in this regard to a recommendation that I've previously made regarding how CMOs can use their tariffs or their royalty setting system to correct something like gender inequalities in the creative sector. I'll also again share the link to that commentary. And my suggestion basically in that regard is that CMOs could, for instance, offer more favorable terms to copyright users where they use the large work of a number of women, for example, and that this can encourage other copyright users to follow suit, and that when appropriately captured, demographic trends can assist in the appropriate allocation of resources. And so requiring CMOs, through the regulatory framework and CMOs themselves taking the initiative to provide things like gender disaggregated membership list, distribution plan, gender preferential royalty treatments and things like that in relevant reports can assist with planning and may likely result in policies that address and prioritize inequalities. So I'm going to conclude by saying that for the function of monitoring uses, collecting royalties, distributing royalties to copyright owners, Dr. Kwakwa has mentioned the importance of metadata and looking at it from, him looking at it from Africa's demographic strengths. In my own presentation, I'm looking at it from the role of the CMOs themselves. And CMOs need to exercise the highest levels of accountability and transparency if they are to empower youth for a better future. And the twin pillars of accountability and transparency apply mutatis mutandis. They apply on all fours to all functions of CMOs. And Dr. Rekoba explores this in his book, particularly from the perspectives of copyright law and competition law as regulatory framework. So I'm not going to give spoilers for those that are yet to read the book. But I can say that beyond these established regulatory frameworks, CMOs must take initiatives themselves to effectively and efficiently undertake their functions. And I've already made suggestions in this presentation, and I've also written on the subject of corporate governance of collective management organizations and the limit of public regulatory powers. And Dr. Rekoba's book also makes references to varied aspects of regulation of CMOs, which he has explored, of course, in his other scholarly writings. And I recommend this to everyone. And let me stop here and say thank you again for inviting me to present. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Okorie, for your wonderful presentation. I mean, I had no doubt that you would do justice. Just some important disclosure here. Dr. Okorie and I share the same PhD supervisor, who happened to be Professor Caroline Okube. And we have done a lot of research collaboration, particularly in this area. She is one of the leading authors also, as far as collective management of copyright and related rights in Africa is concerned. I would recommend her works anytime. When Dr. Kwakwa was talking, he mentioned, he advised that creative youth should adopt business models, actually digital business models for the promotion and for their economic empowerment. One way of doing this is by looking at an important book also written by Dr. Okorie on multi-sided music platforms. The book was published in 2020 by Routledge. I recommend that book to African creative youth and everyone in the audience. Without taking much of your time, I'm going to invite one of our very own, who, like I said at the initial part, is an alumnus, a very great alumnus at that, of the University of Venda. He finished from the School of Law. He is currently the Deputy Registrar of Governance in the University of South Africa. Dr. Joel Baloyi will be presenting on adaptation of collective management organizations, operation models to accommodate the needs of African creators in the fourth industrial revolution era and beyond. Dr. Joel Baloyi.
So much. I'm trying to put up my presentation. If you can just give me a moment. But whilst I do so, I would like to thank my colleague, Dr. Desmond, for having reached out to me with regard to availing myself for this a very important platform that we are having today to look at issues that relate to how the youth can harness intellectual property, and in particular, in this case, copyright, and through the use of copyright administration systems. And we are looking at collective management as a system of copyright administration. Just give me a moment to share the document on the screen. But I would like to say that it is also a privilege to me that I'm here and in a platform relating to my alma mater, the University of Venda. I studied at this university from the early 90s. Can I just check, Dr. Desmond, if the presentation is showing on the screen?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you so much. Yes, so I studied at this university for 2 degrees, my BJuris degree, which I completed in 1994, and my LLB in 2003. Then I went to study at the University of the Western Cape, and that's where I met Dr. Kwakwa, and it was really my first opportunity to cut my academic teeth with respect to issues relating to intellectual property. And I sat under his tutelage, where that really whetted my appetite with regard to issues relating to intellectual property. But it's also very interesting that when I did my LLB at UNIVEN from 2002 to 2003, my main interest that I had was I wanted to understand, more about rights that apply to musicians. Being a musician myself, and having interacted with many musicians and finding that there are many issues with regard to how they administer their rights. So I had this intense interest to really understand how issues relating to the music industry, music law apply. So when I did my LLB, I insisted, and I think I was the very first student to do so, when I was required to take an elective, to take an elective in music theory, grade 4, from the Department of Music. And there was some resistance in me doing that because they say it has never been done. But I insisted in saying, I have an interest in wanting to understand how this industry works. And so eventually they allowed me, and I did that course. And I also took a course in musical entrepreneurship from UNISA. But it was when I did my LLM that I got the opportunity to really delve a bit deeper into understanding how the music industry works and how issues of intellectual property would apply there. So my dissertation was focused on that. And when I did my doctorate, the topic was more focused on the copyright protection of musical works, a historical and contextual analysis, which happened to be the first doctoral research in this particular area of law. But I was also privileged in that when I completed my LLM, I then started to work. I worked for one of the, or maybe the biggest CMO in Africa, the Southern African Music Rights Organization, where I worked over a number of years, including as a head of legal and company secretary. And that's where I got to understand more about the industry and got to interact more with industry players. And I have continued to do so, up to now. But I think in relation to, our current topic, I think that some of the issues that I'm speaking about here or speaking on have already been dealt with by my colleagues. So, what are CMOs? Collective management organizations. They are known by other different names: collecting societies, collective society, copyright society, copyright administration society, copyright collective as used in the USA. But the acronym CMO is sort of like the most recognized in terms of identifying these entities. And this system of collective management involves the collective management of rights that emanate from copyright and related rights. And that's important to note. And in the South African context, this arises from the Copyright Act of 1978 as amended, and the Performance Protection Act relating to the rights of performers. It covers a number of areas: literary works, musical works, sound recordings, and audiovisual works. And however, it's important to also note that the most established CMOs in this regard are in the music rights area, and then the literary rights area. And when we ask the question as to why CMOs, it's important to ask it from the context that the exclusive right of authors to exploit their works or authorize others to do so is what has been called the basic element of copyright. And this can be fully enjoyed, when the rights holders themselves exercise their rights individually, so that they can then determine the conditions under which those works must be used and what remuneration they must get. Under certain circumstances, however, it becomes impossible for them or difficult for them to actually exercise these rights in an effective and efficient manner. And that's where the system of collective management comes in. For example, where you're having multiple users of works, where you're having works that are used in different places and varying times. So a rights holder who has created works today would not know who is using their works in Cape Town at this stage, how many people are using it, or in Abuja or in any other part of the world. So the system of collective management then became a very effective system in terms of helping rights holders in this regard. The need to access works immediately, difficulties with regard to negotiating for the rights and who should be representing the artist and all that. Under such circumstances, it becomes difficult or costly to negotiate with all these users, to monitor uses, and even to collect usage fees. So by pulling these rights together, where a number of rights holders come together and they pull their rights through this system of collective management, the CMOs are then able to address those difficulties. And this is made possible through a system of licensing called blanket licensing. And by blanket licensing, we mean that one license is given to a user that covers all the rights that are represented by one particular CMO. And the CMO could be representing rights of its own national rights holders, but also the rights of other rights holders from other jurisdictions that are then brought together through this system of reciprocal representation of foreign societies, through the CSEC system, the BEAM system, the IFRO system, whereby a collecting society in a particular jurisdiction can then represent the rights of all these rights holders. So one collecting society could be administering well over 5 million pieces of works that they can give to one user at any given time through this particular system. And there are different ways in which these rights would be, administered by collecting societies. They can be, as I said, earlier, through a system of where, voluntarily the rights holders would, get into a relationship with the CMO to administer their rights. But we have what are called legislation-based licensing forms, which are both voluntary and non-voluntary. The non-voluntary systems include systems like what we call, mandatory licensing. So mandatory licensing is where a legislation would say that certain rights must be administered through a system of collective management. So that is already determined in terms of legislation, and they cannot be administered in any other way. For example, in South Africa, if you look at the nil time rights, and we have a compulsory licensing system. A compulsory licensing system is really also mandatory, but in this case, negotiation is possible in terms of negotiating the license itself. that between the society and the user. And then there is statutory licensing, where the remuneration is determined in the statute itself. For example, the USA system of administering mechanical rights. And then you have voluntary legislative licensing forms, where you have what is called implied licensing. It's a system that applies in the UK, for example, where a user that would use certain rights would be indemnified from liability if they have a license with a CMO, even if that a particular rights holder is not a member of that CMO, but by entering into that blanket license with a user, then their rights are deemed to be covered. Then there are legal presumptions like those used in Germany, where essentially it is a case of saying that where a CMO approaches the user can presume that that CMO is representing all other rights holders in that particular grouping. Extended collective licensing, as used in the Nordic countries, is where this is also an implied licensing, whereby a rights holder, this is now on the part of the rights holder, can expect to be represented by a CMO, even if they are not necessarily a member of that CMO. Just looking at the brief historical overview of collective management, the system, it's one of the oldest systems of copyright administration, and in fact, one of the oldest effective systems of copyright administration. Started in 1777 in France with the establishment of the Society of Dramatic Authors, and in the area of music rights, it was in 1847 with the formation of the Copyright Society, SASM. Both SACAD and SASM remain as copyright societies in France. And then in the Anglo-American world, it developed much later in the 20th century, the PRS in the UK, in America, ASCAP, and that's how it evolved. In South Africa, the system developed much early also, soon after the PRS was established, because the PRS then established an agency in South Africa, in the Union of South Africa, from 1925 until 1965, when SAMRO, the South African Music Rights Organization, was established. This was followed by, mechanical rights societies such as the now defunct SARAL and the now defunct NORM, and the activities are now carried out by an entity called CAPASO, Composers, Authors and Publishers Association. And then you have other entities like the Independent Music Performance Rights Association, which was constituted to represent audiovisual rights and nail-time rights of independent rights holders. Now, if you then look at the traditional benefits of collective management, as we seek to answer the question as to whether CMOs remain relevant in the 4IR age, those traditional roles were seen as like monitoring the use of members' works, negotiating with prospective users, issuing licenses, collecting remuneration, distributing remuneration, and the relevance of CMOs today must therefore be assessed against the relevance of those particular roles that have been seen as the traditional roles of CMOs. Now, the fourth industrial revolution, or 4IR, has been identified as being characterized by a blurring of boundaries between the physical, the digital, and biological worlds, made possible by such technologies as artificial intelligence, quantum computing, robotics, and Internet of Things, and other related technologies. Much of the changes that disrupted the copyright industries in the 21st century related to digital technology, which began with the MP3 revolution of Napsters in the early 2000s, and this was really the third industrial revolution, characterized by automation and digitization. 4IR, has arrived or fallen upon the copyright industries at a time when they were still trying to grapple with how to cope with the earlier technology, the 3IR technologies. In 2004, contemplating on this particular issue, the following was written in the WIPO Intellectual Property Handbook. Collective management of copyright and related rights will gain in efficiency and precision and improve through digital technology, including computer programs, especially designed to allow new authors societies to access such digital systems and the data on works and recordings transmitted therein. And however, the reality is that although attempts have been made to try and adapt to the digital environment, for example, after the CSEC decision of 2013, which disrupted the model of collective management, and in particular with regard to the focus on national licensing, territorial licensing of rights, and the EU directive of 2014, which introduced a model of collective management, which moved away from the traditional model and focused on the digital licensing. So there have been a number of efforts that have then been undertaken to try and adapt in relation to this. However, some of the key challenges of 4IR are reflected in this narration from the OECD, where they say a key trend is a development of technology-enabled platforms that combine both demand and supply to disrupt existing industry structures, such as those we see within the sharing or the on-demand economy. These technology platforms, rendered easy to use by a smartphone, convene people's assets and data, thus creating entirely new ways of consuming goods and services in the process. In addition, they lower the barriers for businesses and individuals to create wealth, altering the personal and professional environments of workers. One of the features of digital technology and now 4IR has been this whole concept of disintermediation, which is really, being able to dispense with the intermediaries that were considered to be necessary in terms of the whole value chain of the exploitation of rights, and in other words, cutting out the middleman. And CMOs are a prime example of a middleman or an intermediary. So multiple self-help opportunities have arisen in the current age, where artists can almost, or there are promises for artists to actually have their rights administered without really having to rely on other, traditional intermediaries. For example, we're living in the age of CD Baby, iTunes, Amazon, YouTube, Shazam, Deezer, Tidal, and all those platforms that are promising rights holders, artists, a way of having their rights administered without having to go through the traditional middlemen. Many of those propose to offer artists hassle-free licensing of their music, which reduces, administration fees, and it's quick, it's in real-time distribution, where societies would distribute royalties in certain intervals, for example, after 3 months or after 6 months. But these platforms are, offering to distribute the royalties as and when they're paid, and just go into the account of the artist. And they introduce models whereby the artist will retain their rights. So you don't have to assign your rights, part with your rights, just pay a certain fee, you remain with your rights, and we can just do the rest for you. We will ensure that all your rights, wherever they are used, are taken care of. There are new 4IR technologies such as blockchain technology and the use of so-called non-fungible tokens that has become the hype today in terms of how rights holders can very easily ensure that their rights are safeguarded, and presenting possibilities that are outside the traditional CMO model. New services that purport to monitor music usage. So you have a lot of service providers that approach rights holders and say, we can actually tell you exactly where your work was used and how it was used anyway. And so it now brings in a challenge to the traditional role of CMOs with regard to monitoring of music usage, and also with regard to issues around transparency. My colleague mentioned that whole issue. Am I getting the royalties I should be getting? Because when these monitoring agencies or entities approach artists, they tell them that we can tell you exactly where your works were used and how they were used. So it would seem that all of the traditional roles that CMOs have been involved with or known for being responsible for are being challenged by these new technologies. Whether it's monitoring the use of members' works, as I said, there are these entities that are purporting to do that. Negotiating with prospective users, the rights holders are being told, they don't really have to worry about all that part. The service provider, the digital platform will do it for them. Issuing licenses, everything will be dealt with, and collecting remuneration, distributing in real time. So CMOs therefore have a very important task in terms of having to review their models with regard to a number of issues to become relevant. And Dr. Kwakwa mentioned the fact that CMOs will remain relevant, especially for jurisdictions in Africa. And I agree with that, because they become sort of they are very close to the rights holders. People know where they are, and the rights holders can establish long-term relationships with them. However, the CMOs need to really up their games in terms of the way that they deal with a number of things. Acquisition of rights, for example. Traditionally, performing rights societies like SAMRO have acquired rights by way of assignment of rights. So you assign your whole right to the entity, and some would use exclusive licenses. But there needs to be flexibility where societies should be able to use short-term licensing arrangements with their rights holders, such as even issuing non-exclusive licenses, and to ensure agility. They must up their games in terms of adapting to new technologies such as the blockchain technology to enhance their ability to administer rights in the 4IR environment. And I think with this, I will pause for now. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Dr. Baloyi. I like to take us back to the basics, and this will be very important for members, for the audience who are not versed in the area of copyright and how copyright licensing and collective management organizations operate. I'm running out of time, so I'll just play a recorded presentation by Dr. Marisella Ouma that is focusing on leveraging technology for effective collective management of copyright and related rights. But before as I try to share my screen to play that, please note that you can drop in your questions. I see that questions are already being dropped on the chat box. And once we are done with Dr. Maricella's presentation, we will take the experts discussants today. We take on those questions and answer every bit of them before we call it a wrap in the next 30 minutes. I'll just share my screen so I can play Dr. Ouma's presentation. Just a minute, please. Okay. All right, there we go.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Marisella Ouma, and I'm delighted to be here today to be part of the discussion on intellectual property and the youth, innovation for a better future, which is the theme for this year's World Intellectual Property Day. In particular, I'll be looking at the use of innovative technologies in effective management of copyright and related rights, and how this enhances the role of CMOs in empowering the youth in Africa's creative industry. I am confident that the discussion this afternoon will address some of the recurring questions in light of the performance of existing CMOs in Africa. Collective management of copyright and related rights in Africa, in comparison to other regions, may be deemed to be relatively new, given that most countries have just recently updated their copyright laws and established collective management organizations. Some of the oldest collective management organizations may be found in countries such as Egypt and South Africa. The institutional framework of the collective management organizations is determined by the existing legal framework, thus the different types of collective management organizations across the region. Some may be established to administer one category of rights, as is the case with Kenya, Egypt, Nigeria, South Africa, Zambia, and Zimbabwe, to name a few. In such countries, it is possible to have several collective management organizations dealing with the different rights. On the other hand, you may have one collective management organization that is established either by law to cater for all categories of rights. And examples include COSOMA in Malawi, COSBOTS in Botswana, Buridra in Cote d'Ivoire, ONDA in Algeria, and BMDA in Morocco. Every other day, we get to hear about collective management organizations that have issues with the execution of their mandate. But we also get to hear the success stories which lead to the creation of intellectual capital for the benefit of the collective management organization members. What is the secret to this? Well, regardless of the nature of the collective management organization, efficiency is important. Effective collective management of copyright and related rights is necessary for the growth and development of a vibrant creative industry. This calls for transparency and accountability in the co-mandate in relation to the collection and distribution of royalties, as well as proper governance structures. Of course, technology plays an important role in ensuring transparency and accountability, as well as putting into place the desired governance structures. From music, film, software, visual arts, publishing, the youth have over the years contributed to the growth of the creative industries, and more so over the digital environment. We shall briefly look at the drivers of technological innovation, such as the internet and mobile technology. The internet is pivotal in the knowledge economy, and this has in the recent past been driven by mobile phone technology, which provides cheaper, faster internet connectivity, even in the most remote parts of the continent. As of March 2020, according to the Internet World Statistics, over 526 million people were connected to the internet, which basically represents about 39% of the total population. Of course, by now the figure is well over 40% and is expected to get to 50% by 2025. The percentage of mobile internet users is estimated at 26% and is projected to reach 39% by 2025. Well, the 4G penetration is still quite low, and this is currently at 9%, but I trust that this will definitely grow as time goes by. These are not just statistics, but they translate to opportunities for the youth in the creative industries, and in particular, collective management of copyright and related rights. It is notable that the youth form a significant number of the internet and mobile subscribers and users within the continent. Innovation technologies are continuously reshaping the creation of products and services, as well as redefining the markets. Use of copyright-protected works is no longer restricted by borders and may be available in different jurisdictions at the same time. This translates to bigger markets and more complex mechanisms for the collection and distribution of royalties, given that collective management organizations are territorial. There is thus need to leverage these technologies. The only constant in technological development is the fact that it is constantly changing and providing challenges and opportunities in equal measures. Some of the technological disruptions that we have seen recently include the dynamic modes of creation and dissemination of content. Copyright content is now available at the click of a button, as long as one has access to the internet. Works, as discussed in the previous slide, may be accessed across the borders, as the internet is seemingly borderless. Therefore, we can watch movies, read digital books, access software, participate in games, access photographs, various visual arts, to name a few. Everything basically has been digitized. Streaming services, as well as on-demand services, and other digital platforms have grown exponentially over the last decade and are very popular among the youth. For many years, collective management organizations have relied on reciprocal arrangements to manage rights across the borders. With the increased number of digital service providers, multi-territorial licensing is crucial in the administration of copyright and related rights. For instance, in the EU, there are several digital platforms for multi-territorial licensing of music works. These increase efficiency and are cost-effective in relation to the execution of the CMO's mandate. Examples are ICE and Ammonia, as well as Unison. In our continent, the Composers, Authors and Publishers Association, CAPASO, a digital rights licensing agency based in South Africa, launched what is known as the Pan-African Licensing Hub, whose membership is drawn from various CMOs across the continent. Like ICE and other European Union digital licensing platforms, they license the digital rights for music publishers and composers. So far, the hub has signed multi-territorial agreements with various digital service providers, and these include YouTube, Facebook, Spotify, Apple Music, Boomplay, Music Time, Mdundo, to name a few. Social media. This is one of the most disruptive technologies in relation to collective management of rights, as not only does it provide platforms for creation and distribution of content, but also creates challenges in collective management. User-generated content, such as what we see on TikTok and YouTube videos, creates an avenue for the use of copyright works, such as background music, which requires permission from the rights holders and would thus require an effective monitoring system. Digital publishing and imaging also present opportunities in the digital networks, especially in relation to photographs and visual arts. Technological innovations apply to different aspects of collective management, such as registration of rights holders and works with the collective management organization. For instance, when you think about online registration, this may be used to offer more effective and efficient recruitment of members. As a rights holder, one can register from any part of the country or even any part of the world at a minimal or no cost at all. This, for instance, has recently been deployed by Sambro in South Africa, which has simplified and streamlined the member registration experience. Collection of royalties from the different users can be a problem, especially in the age of social media and other disruptive technologies. However, the same technology may be used to provide solutions and ensure proper management of these rights. An example is the use of big data and artificial intelligence. This may be used to identify the users and track the use for purposes of collective management. They may also be helpful in the case of cross-border licensing or multi-territorial licensing for use of works over the internet and other digital networks. Big data may also be used for purposes of identifying and creating relevant technologies to employ in the general administration of copyrights and related rights. This is because data, when analyzed, gives a story that may be used to provide the much required solutions. Blockchain may also be employed for purposes of collective management organizations. I guess I will not go into the details of this, but the advantage being for now that the creation of a footprint that enables the collective management organization to track, follow up, and discharge its mandate more effectively. Having accurate data makes the distribution of royalties more efficient. Therefore, storage solutions such as cloud computing and storage mitigates issues such as loss of data. Given the borderless nature of the internet, use of the above technologies would definitely be a plus for the collective management organizations. Innovative technologies need not be earth-moving, earth-shaking. They could be simple solutions that deal with tasks that provide efficiency, address challenges and emerging issues, as well as simply enhance collection and distribution of royalties. Issues of governance. This is one area where you find many problems emanate from in relation to collective management organizations. Therefore, technology may be deployed to address some of these issues. For instance, the number, if it's a company that has been incorporated and it's limited by guarantee, you could have a system which deals with the board issues, the electronic board. You could have a system which provides for the various policies that are required for proper governance of this particular collective management organizations. And it may also be able to provide a dashboard on the various policies and monitoring the implementation of these particular policies. Technology does not operate in a vacuum. From our discussions this afternoon, we note that although the youth form the majority of the population within the continent, as well as have their numbers in terms of the usage of the internet and mobile telephony, this has not been felt in terms of governance. There is need to have more of them participate in governance issues and ensure that their voices are heard and proper mechanisms are put in place to ensure effective collective management. In addition, it is also imperative that they ensure that there are supporting legal and institutional frameworks for collective management in their respective jurisdictions. From the discussions, it is clear that opportunities abound. The youth stand to benefit from the innovative technologies in collective management of rights. We hope that we shall be able to use this technology to unlock Africa's demographic dividend. I also wish to take this opportunity to thank Professor Caroline and her team at the UCT, as well as Dr. Desmond from University of Venda for giving me this opportunity to have time to discuss one of my favorite topics. Thank you very much and have a good afternoon.
Yeah, so that's Dr. Maricella's presentation. Now, one of the key takeaways I gathered from our presentation and that of Dr. Baloyi is the opportunities that are available for collective management organizations in the digital era and even with the fourth industrial revolution, and how CMOs can leverage on these opportunities to further empower the African creative youth. We are fast running out of time, and so I would look at the questions that we have in the chat on the chat box and call on our presenters to help do justice to them. So we have one question from Professor Lonias and Ndlovu. I see that Dr. Baloyi has already attended to it, but for the benefit of every other person, I will just read it out. Please educate us on the cost implication for joining CMOs for youth during the question and answer sessions. And Dr. Baloyi responded, many CMOs in South Africa, e.g. SAMRO and SAMPRA, do not charge joining fees. Capaso charges a minimal annual fee used, it usually to be 100 Rand for composers, an additional 250 Rand for publishers. In fact, that is just the answer. CMOs, some of them do not charge membership joining fees. So it is so easy and straightforward to become a member of any CMO. All you just need to do as a creative is to find out what individual CMOs have as the membership rules. I see Mr. Armabulana wants to know okay, what is your view about our copyright amendment bill? Does it protect right holders, especially musicians, especially with regards to, yeah. So I think that question is for Dr. Baloyi, directed at him directly. What is his view about the copyright amendment bill with regards to musicians, as with more focus on the distribution of royalties? Dr. Baloyi, please, do you want to take that?
Thanks so much. I'm not sure if this question is not opening an honest nest, because it's been one of the most debated issues. The process for the copyright amendment bill started around 2015, and one of the reasons why it has not been completed up to this stage are these contestations as to whether that bill adequately, takes into account the rights of rights holders. But perhaps particularly in relation to the question around CMOs, I think that the bill is seeking to try and ensure more certainty in respect of areas that relate to the collective management of rights, in terms of how it seeks to introduce systems of rights management. Currently, the only societies that are regulated in terms of legislation in South Africa are the needle time, the so-called needle time rights collecting societies. Other societies are not, like SAMRO and CAPASO, are not regulated. So within the regime of this new bill, they will also fall within the fold of the administration of rights. And I think that will give more a sense of assurance to rights holders that the whole issue around accountability and transparency. But of course, I'm just answering with respect particularly to the issue of collective management in the bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Somebody wants to say something? Okay. The last question is directed at me. Our libraries have a huge collection of print and ebooks and photocopy machines. Can CMOs assist? If I understand this question very well, I think you're talking about clearing rights, clearing the rights in relation to those collections. Yes, the Dramatic Artistic and Literary Rights Organization, DALRO, is the collective management organization in South Africa that focuses on licensing, that issues licensing on behalf of authors and publishers of print and published works, literary works generally. So if you can clear, the rights, you can obtain license, a blanket license from DARO covering those collections, so as to be safe from any kind of copyright infringement claim. I think we have really done justice to the presentation today. I can't find any further questions on the chat box. I don't know if anybody from the audience has any questions, but if there is none, as I see that there is none, please permit me to invite the head of department, who is Professor Anthony Nwafo, who is ably represented by the acting head. Professor Anthony Nwafo, by the way, is on leave and is in Nigeria, and is ably represented by Advocate Gideon Jobert, who will be taking the closing remarks and vote of thanks on his behalf. You're muted.
Thank you, Dr. Desmond. Colleagues, it's a great honor for me to do these closing remarks and do the thanks. I'm standing in for Prof. Nwafo, who's the head of this department. And on his behalf, I want to extend my gratitude to all of you who are here this afternoon. This event celebrates Intellectual Property Day, and it celebrates the resourceful creativity of the human mind, and especially our youth, and the ability of them to create new and original art. We have all benefited this afternoon from a most stimulating presentation by leaders in the field of IP and guiding our thoughts to further harness and protect creativity for our African youth, so that their ingenuity can be recognized and be celebrated. Allow me then first to extend words of appreciation to those who have been at the brainchild of this webinar, It has indeed been a collaborative team effort by Dr. Desmond and Dr. Kalawole. Gentlemen, your efforts have reaped a great harvest to the benefit of us all and many who have watched this afternoon. And we thank you for putting in together such a brilliant program and facilitating so well this afternoon. We hope it's not the last webinar that you will put together. So we are greatly appreciative of that. You may applaud them digitally if you like. Next, we want to appreciate our Executive Dean for the Faculty of Management, Commerce and Law, Professor Barwa Kanyane. Thank you, sir, for doing the official opening and the welcoming to this webinar, and thank you that you are always in loyal support for the work done by your faculty members. Next, Professor Caroline Ngubi from the University of Cape Town. We acknowledge your invaluable influence and your contribution to intellectual property on the African continent. Thank you for your heartfelt words of encouragement at the onset of this event and your support for this collaborative initiative. And we look forward, ma'am, to partner with you again in the future. Then thanks to Professor Lonias Ndlovu, he's our acting director in the School of Law. You did well, sir, in delivering an informative concept note about the position of African youth and the potential to exploit the wealth they possess and present. You set an appetizing pre-taste of the main feast of presentations that followed, so thank you for that. Then, in order of appearance today, I'm going to then express our gratitude, sincere gratitude to the presenters, Dr. Edward Kwakwa. We know that he is no longer in the meeting, and so in his absence, we do recognize his contribution. He had a talk on IP and youth, unlocking Africa's demographic dividend. He so eloquently explained the gaps in the creative industries through which African youth artists fall. He explained the need to educate our youth creators concerning the economic mileage they could unlock. And we are indebted to his valuable contribution to today's webinar and thank him in his absence. Then next, Dr. Okorie. Thank you. You addressed us on the role of African Collective Management Organization in empowering youth for a better future. She highlighted so vividly the important functions to be performed by CMOs to help ensure a fair playing field for all players and to create incentives for youth in the creative sector to empower our youth. We thank you for your sharing with us such valuable and necessary insights into the functionality of CMOs and that it could foster a better future for the creative youth. Thank you, Dr. Okorie, for an engaging presentation. Then next we had Dr. Joel Baloyi. He presented on the adaptation of collective management organizations' operational models to accommodate the need for African creators in the fourth industrial revolution era and beyond. Dr. Baloyi, you argued the essence of CMOs to address the problematic pitfalls creative artists may face. And the necessity for blanket licensing created by CMOs was made evidently clear, as well as the regulatory framework for licensing. But then we also were cautioned about the possible regulatory dilemmas brought about by the fourth industrial revolution. Thank you, Dr. Baloyi, for a very practical and colorful presentation. Then finally, we had Dr. Ouma. We've just viewed your video presentation and thank you in your absence. We thank you for sending that. You did a presentation on leveraging technology for effective collective management of copyright and related rights. In your absence, we recognize your respected contribution to this webinar, ma'am. She provided a statistically clear and graphic image for grasping the dramatic rise of innovative technologies and the many implications and the complications caused by it for the protection of IP rights. She made valuable suggestions on how to address and overcome these challenges. So then in conclusion, as a word of thanks, we appreciate all of you who have attended the webinar today, taking your time to join us as we celebrate IP Day here with our African youth. We hope to meet with you soon again in future. And this webinar is now unfortunately coming to a close, yet we want to stay longer. So thank you and goodbye to you all.
we come to the end of the webinar. Thank you very much. Goodbye, everyone, from my side.
Goodbye, everyone. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. That was great.
Thank you very much.
You did excellent.
Thank you, sir. God bless you. I like to